Welcome to Revenge with Nora. I drove 2 hours to get to my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner. I ironed my dress the night before. I brought a card with a handwritten note inside. And when I walked through the door of the private dining room my family had reserved at the Hargrove Hotel, my aunt looked at me, then looked at my mother, and my mother gave the smallest shake of her head. My aunt stepped forward, smiled the way people smile when they're about to say something cruel in a polite voice, and said, "Sweetheart, tonight is just for immediate family. You understand. I am immediate family. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 32 years old. I am a contracts attorney." And the rehearsal dinner, they were turning me away from the flowers, the open bar, the chef's tasting menu, the photographer stationed at the entrance. I had paid for all of it. Every dollar. Not because anyone asked me nicely. Because my brother called me 8 months ago and said he needed help, and I said yes the way I always say yes, quietly, without making it a performance. I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Okay," turned around, walked back through the lobby, sat in my car, and opened my laptop. Because I work in contracts. And every agreement I had funded for this wedding was written with my name on it. I started with the rehearsal dinner. $8,400. Reversed. Then the wedding venue deposit. The honeymoon package to Portugal flights, hotel, private tour bookings, $14,700. Cancelled. The refund would go back to my card within 3 to 5 business days. The wedding dress my mother had told me was a gift from the family. $6,200, charged to my account 7 months ago. I filed a dispute. The catering contract for the reception. She asked if there was a problem. I said there had been a miscommunication and I needed to place the contract on hold. She said she understood and that nothing would be confirmed without my written release. By the time I pulled out of the hotel parking lot, I had reversed or frozen $82,300. My phone started ringing before I reached the highway. I let it go to voicemail. I got home, changed into sweatpants, made tea, and sat at my kitchen table with a folder I had started keeping 14 months ago. Not because I had planned this, but because I am an attorney, and attorneys keep records. It is just what we do. By 10 o'clock that night, I had 43 missed calls. 11 from my mother, 9 from my brother, 6 from his fiancée. The rest from numbers I either didn't recognize or hadn't spoken to in years. My aunt called 4 times. My father, who had not called me on my birthday in 3 years, called twice. I did not answer any of them. Then someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw my brother standing on my front step, still in his rehearsal dinner clothes, tie loosened, jaw tight. He knocked again, harder. I opened the door, but did not step back. He looked at me the way he used to when we were children, and he had broken something and needed me to help him hide it. "Claire," he said. "The venue just called Mom. The catering company is saying the contract is on hold. The florist got some kind of notification about a payment freeze." "What did you do?" "I protected my financial interests," I said. "Same thing I'd tell any client to do." He stared at me. "This is my wedding." "I know," I said. "I've been paying for it." He started to say something about overreacting. About how tonight was complicated, how the seating was already finalized, how my aunt had made the decision and it wasn't his fault, how my mother was upset, how I was making everything about myself on the most important weekend of his life. I held up my hand. "You called me a year ago and said you needed help." I said yes. "I paid the venue deposit while you were still engaged. I paid for your fiancé's dress-fitting trip to New York. I covered the save the dates, the invitations, the centerpiece consultations, the engagement party at the Callaway Room, which cost $11,000 and which your fiancé's mother toasted as a gift from the whole family. I was not mentioned. Tonight, I drove 2 hours to be turned away at the door by our aunt while our mother watched and said nothing. So I did the only thing that made sense. I stopped writing checks. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "People are going to find out. The wedding is in 4 days." "That is a logistical problem," I said, "and you are welcome to solve it. but you will need $82,000 to do it." He left. He didn't say goodbye. He walked to his car and sat in it for a long time before driving away. I watched him through the window. Then I went back to my kitchen table and opened a second folder. The next morning, I received a call from someone I did not expect. It was Daniel, my brother's wedding planner, who had been CC'd on every contract from the beginning. He was calm, professional, and deeply careful with his words. He said he wanted to flag something he had noticed when reviewing the account files after the payment freeze alert. He had seen that the primary account holder on every vendor contract was my LLC, Whitmore Legal Consulting, and that several of the earlier payments, including the venue deposit and the engagement party, had been listed in the family's shared expense tracker as contributions from family savings. There was no family savings account that had ever contributed $1 to this wedding. I confirmed that for him. He paused. Then he said, "I want to be transparent with you. Your brother's fiance's parents have been telling vendors and guests that this wedding is being hosted jointly by both families. There are people who believe the Whitmore Family Trust is backing the event. There is no Whitmore Family Trust that had ever been discussed with me." I asked him to send me whatever documentation he had seen referencing it. He did. Within the hour, I had emails forwarded from the venue coordinator, 2 vendor invoices that listed Whitmore Family Estate Fund as a secondary guarantor, and a printed program draft for the wedding reception that listed the event as hosted by the families of with my family name printed as a co-host. I called my attorney, not as a colleague, as a client. Her name is Sandra, and she has known me for 6 years, and she did not seem surprised by anything I told her. She asked me 2 questions. First, had I signed anything authorizing the use of my family name in any official hosting capacity? I had not. Second, had I been made aware that my payments were being represented to third parties as coming from a family fund rather than from my personal LLC? I had not. She said we could send a clarification notice to every vendor within 24 hours. A formal letter establishing that all payments had originated from my LLC and that no family estate fund existed in connection with this event. She said it would be simple, clean, and unambiguous. I said, "Do it." I also asked her about the engagement party, whether representing my individually funded event as a collective family contribution in writing to guests and vendors crossed into misrepresentation. She said it depended on whether anyone had financially relied on that representation. She said she would look into it. While she did, I received a voicemail from my mother. She spoke for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know because I timed it before I deleted it. She said I was being vindictive. She said my brother had worked so hard for this and his fiancée was devastated, and the photographer had called asking for a release confirmation, and the florist was threatening to reallocate inventory to other clients. She said I had always done this, always found a way to make my feelings everyone else's emergency. She said that being excluded from the rehearsal dinner had been a simple miscommunication, that the table count was already finalized, that she had assumed I had other plans, that no one had meant anything by it. I noticed she did not say she was sorry. I noticed she did not say it was wrong. She said she hoped I would think about what I was doing to the family before I went any further. Then she said, "People talk, Claire. The Hargroves are going to hear about this. Pastor Ellis is going to hear about this. Your father's colleagues. Think about what this looks like for all of us." I thought about what it looked like for all of them. I thought about it for approximately 30 seconds. Then I called Sandra back and told her to proceed. The clarification letters went out that afternoon. Every vendor received written confirmation that the contracting party was Whitmore Legal Consulting, that no family estate or family trust was associated with the event, and that all payment authorizations required my written approval. By evening, the calls had changed tone. My mother stopped calling. My brother's fiancée texted me a paragraph that started with, "I had no idea," and ended with, "Please don't do this to us." My aunt sent a voice message saying she wanted to explain. An uncle I had not heard from in 2 years texted to ask if everything was all right. I did not respond to any of them. What I did respond to was a text from my cousin Diane, the only member of my extended family who had texted to ask how I was doing rather than what I was doing. She said, "I heard what happened at the dinner. I'm sorry. That was wrong. Nothing else. No request, no angle, just that." I wrote back, "Thank you." That was all. The next morning, Sandra called. Her forensic billing review had found something. When she cross-referenced the vendor invoices against the family's shared expense documentation, the screenshots my brother had shared with me early in the planning process to show how everyone was contributing, she feels documentation, found a pattern. Every line item I had funded had been logged in that document under a different source. The venue deposit, dad's bonus. The engagement party. Family contribution. The wedding dress trip. Mom and bridesmaids. The centerpiece consultations, bride's side, shared. My name appeared in that document exactly once. In a column labeled "Still Pending." Next to a line item for a wedding cake I had not agreed to pay for and had never been asked to pay for. $3,400. I had been systematically written out of every contribution I had made. Not just at the rehearsal dinner. In writing. Over months. Sandra said, "This is a pattern of financial misrepresentation. It's not just careless bookkeeping. Someone maintained this document intentionally." I asked her how quickly we could move. She said, "Define move." I said, "I want a full accounting. Every dollar I put into this family's shared expenses since I started practicing law, not just the wedding. All of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is going to be a significant document." I said, "I've been keeping records for 14 months. I have the folder ready." The number, when Sandra completed the accounting 3 days later, was $214,000. That was the total of documented transfers, payments, and covered expenses I had made to or on behalf of my immediate family over 4 years. Some were loans that had been verbally acknowledged and never repaid. Some were direct payments for family expenses I had been asked to help with just this once. Some were event costs like the wedding that had been framed as collaborative while my contributions were quietly erased from the record. $214,000. And a rehearsal dinner I had driven 2 hours to attend. Sandra filed a formal request for financial accounting and restitution. Not a lawsuit, a request. Clean, documented, specific. They had 30 days to respond. On day 4, my father came to my office. I had not seen him in 8 months. He stood in my doorway in the same gray jacket he wore to every important occasion, and he looked older than I remembered, and I felt something complicated move through me before I put it aside. He said, "You've made your point." I said, "I don't think I have, actually." He said, "Your brother's wedding is in 2 days. The venue is threatening to release the date. The caterer walked. Your mother hasn't slept." I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." He said, "Are you?" I looked at him. "I'm sorry that a series of choices made over several years led to a crisis. I'm not sorry that those choices have consequences." He sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited to. He looked at his hands. He said, "We never thought of it as taking from you. You were doing well. You were always the capable one." We thought. He stopped. "You thought I wouldn't notice," I said. "Or that I wouldn't say anything." He didn't disagree. He reached into his jacket and took out an envelope and slid it across my desk. "This is what we have," he said. "It's not everything, but it's a start." I looked at the envelope. I did not touch it. I said, "Dad, I don't need you to pay me back to be okay. I need you to understand what happened. The money is the evidence. It was never the point." He didn't say anything. He sat there for a long time. Then I said, "At the rehearsal dinner, when Mom shook her head and Aunt Patricia turned me away, were you in the room?" He looked at the window. "Were you in the room?" I said again. He said, "I was at the bar." I said, "Did you see what happened?" He said, very quietly, "Yes." I said, "And you didn't come outside?" He didn't answer. And in that silence, I understood more than any document had told me. I slid the envelope back to him. "Give it to someone who needs it," I said. I'll see you at the hearing. He left. I sat at my desk for a long time after he was gone. He did not apologize either. On day 22, their attorney reached out to Sandra. He offered a private settlement. Return of $60,000, a written acknowledgement of the financial discrepancy, and a mutual agreement not to discuss the matter publicly. No formal admission of wrongdoing. Sandra read me the offer over the phone. I said, "What do you think?" She said, "I think they're frightened." 60,000 is a significant offer for people who, until recently, were treating this as a family misunderstanding. I said, "They wrote me out of every contribution I ever made to this family. In a spreadsheet. With categories. And then they turned me away from a door I paid to open." I paused. "I don't want $60,000. I want the record to exist." Sandra said, "Then we decline." We declined. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was not dramatic. It was a civil proceeding, quiet and procedural, and my family sat across the room with their attorney and did not look at me directly except once my brother, for just a moment, and his expression was not anger. It was something closer to shame. I held his gaze until he looked away. Sandra presented the documentation. The contracts, the payment records, the vendor letters, the expense tracker with its deliberately reassigned line items. The timeline of transfers. The gap between what I had paid and what had been represented to others as the source of those payments. Their attorney called it a family dispute being treated as a legal matter. He said informal arrangements were common in families and that no formal agreements had been signed. The judge looked at the expense tracker. She looked at the vendor letters. She looked at the clarification notices Sandra had sent. She looked at the timeline. She said, "Miss Whitmore, what outcome are you seeking?" I stood up. I said, "I would like the record to accurately reflect what happened. I would like documentation that establishes the source of these funds was my LLC, not a family estate or a collective savings account that does not exist. And I would like formal acknowledgement that the representations made to vendors and guests were inaccurate." She nodded. The judgment was not criminal. No one went to jail, but it was binding. The court issued a formal finding that the financial representations made to third parties had been inaccurate, that the contracting party for all wedding-related expenses was my LLC, and that a restitution amount of $47,000 representing the undisputed portion of unrepaid transfers was owed to me within 90 days. It also put on record, in black and white, that there was no Whitmore Family Estate Fund. There never had been. There was just me, paying quietly, being written out neatly, and told I wasn't invited. The weeks after were very still. My phone stopped ringing with panic. The calls I received were considered ones from Diane, occasionally, who asked how I was doing and did not need an answer that made her feel better about the situation. From Sandra with updates. From colleagues. Normal life. Then a plain envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a photograph, printed on regular paper. It was from the engagement party I had paid for at the Calloway Room. My family stood together in the center of the frame, dressed beautifully, glasses raised, the kind of photograph that ends up framed on a mantel. I was not in it. The photo had been taken while I was at the coat check. On the back, in my mother's handwriting. We didn't know what we had. I held it for a while. I understood what she meant. I understood that she meant it. I also understood that understanding is not the same as repair, and that some things said and done and written down in a spreadsheet do not get to simply unhappen because the person who did them is now afraid of what they cost. I put the photograph in the folder, the one labeled with the case number, and I opened a new one. I had been thinking for a long time about what to do with the restitution, about what it meant to take money I had already spent and receive it back and call that justice. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like arithmetic. What felt like something more was what I set up the following month. A small fund, administered through my LLC, providing financial support to first-generation law students from low-income families. Students who were the capable one. Who said yes when their families needed help. Who kept records because records are all you have when no one else is keeping score. The first grant went to a 26-year-old in Ohio who was paying her own tuition while supporting her parents, who had told everyone in their community that their daughter's success was a family achievement. I signed the award letter myself. I did not write a note. I didn't need to. She would understand.